guys, welcome back to more HOA stories. In this video, OP invested his life savings in an abandoned ranch to live his dream, but a homeowner association neighbor raided his property and claimed that OP must join the adjacent HOA. Let's dive right into the video. The first one is an HOA story from r/legal advice titled, "They are trying to foreclose on my house when all my bills are up to date." This happened in Washington state. So my parents are staying in my home while I live out of the country. We've been gone since 2018. My father informed me that 2 weeks ago, a man who looks like he's for real showed up looking for my husband to deliver a summons. He did not leave a card or any way to contact him. Friday, someone showed up and asked my parents when they were moving out because the house was being foreclosed. However, all our bills are up to date. Taxes, HOA and house payments have never been late as well. All of our mail had been forwarded and we looked online and our lot number is on record through the county auditor's site for having a lien since 2016. We lived there at the time. This was for a company that we did not even recognize. We never got any information that we owed anyone. Wouldn't something like this show up in the mail? We never received anything. Wouldn't it be on our credit reports? We watched those very closely. I don't even know where to start. I'm waiting for the world to wake up in Seattle since I'm still in another frickin' country and I won't be back for a visit until June. I don't know who to call, I don't know who to reach out to, I'm so lost and I don't want to risk losing our forever home. And yeah guys, if you would be in this situation, what would you do? It seems like one of the things HOAs love to do is put a lien on your home for absolutely random stuff. I feel like before they can put a lien on your property, they should inform you what you actually did wrong. Anyway, comment number 1 said, you need to contact a licensed attorney in your state immediately. No one here can tell you anything better. Sounds like perhaps a construction lien for an unpaid subcontractor or vendor or something, but there are numerous steps between recording a lien and actual foreclosure that are missing here. Not saying that those steps didn't happen, they might have and you just don't have actual notice, but you don't screw around with foreclosure. You need a lawyer immediately. That lawyer will or should know what to A. figure out what's happening and B. figure out how to stop it if it is possible. Good luck, by the way. Comment number 2, I'm so sorry to hear you're going through this. By the way, a couple years back my family had something similar happen. A week before Thanksgiving we had a knock on the door and received notice that our house was going up for auction in a couple weeks. To the best of our knowledge, we had never missed a payment on anything, but when we contacted the county, a lien had indeed been in effect for about a year. So much for having LifeLock. Though it took many months to truly identify the root cause, in our case what happened is the HOA changed the billing date when they transitioned to a new system, and this put us a day or two late each month when auto-paying. We never knew, and logging into the online system's homepage declared our account was in good standing. It was only when you went through your account settings and dug into the history screens that it became evident we had late fees accumulating. In the great state of Texas, we struggled to find a lawyer to help. HOAs are all powerful entities and legal help exists only in one direction. To make it even worse, our HOA uses a truly incompetent or just corrupt management company, so I could not even appeal to the board members via email, phone/Nextdoor for help. Next, I reached out to the county. They have a whole page dedicated to home foreclosures and liens and what to do. All these forms to protest with dead links. There I learned that although the city/county are well aware of the abuse, they cannot help. They had no idea why they even have form links on the website. The police were no help as well, as this is a civil matter. The post office was no contact due to the pandemic. Supposedly we had 3 certified mailing delivered and the cost of each was charged to our account, but we most certainly did not get them and nobody ever did produce a record confirming that they were actually sent. So I reached out to the law office in Las Vegas that enacted the lien. The lawyer must have sensed my desperation. Hesitantly, he provided some context regarding the bad business practices of this HOA agency and offered some names of the executives he dealt with. And then here on Reddit, I was told by a lawyer that Texas law forbids foreclosure exclusively due to late payments and they provided the criminal code for it. And then, armed with this knowledge, I hammered the management company's absentee phone lines connected with other distraught people on Nextdoor and googled my way to the emails/phone numbers of the people the lawyer provided. It took weeks due to the holidays and pandemic, but I eventually got in touch with a VP who halted the auction after we paid several thousands of dollars. Getting the lien removed and a refund of some of the fees took many months and an endless back and forth calls. Due to my complaining on social media, I did eventually get a call from the company president and went into great detail about the illegal/immoral going-ons with his company. He legitimately seemed horrified about it all, but his employees just kept screwing things up. The number of follow-up calls and nags to get it all sorted out was nuts, and we still had to pay a good bit. Anywho, your post just struck a chord with me. It was a truly life-changing experience for us, and we came close to losing ourselves. Hopefully the steps I've outlined here can help focus your efforts and you will end up in a good resolution. You probably need to get in contact with an attorney where your house is located to find out more info about that lien and if there are any current legal actions pending against you and/or your husband. And yeah guys, now we have an update to the story that goes like this. Update, thank you to everyone who replied. I spent quite a bit of time on the phone well past my own bedtime because of the time difference, so I have my answer now. My home is not being foreclosed on. Details if you're interested. So we purchased our home in 2012 as literally the first people in the neighborhood. We've done quite a bit of moving around, but kept this house as our forever home. I called our HOA and they verified that we were up to date, and then she asked us if we were good with our sub-HOA. What sub-HOA? Well, apparently there's been a second HOA that quite a few of us had no idea even existed. By the way, Ripestars, imagine not being in one, but two HOAs. I imagine that is what hell looks like. Hell on earth. Either way, the management company was replaced last year when they were found to be misusing funds. That is when letters started going out to quite a few people in the neighborhood. I got in touch with the secondary HOA who directed us to a lawyer. They are telling us that we are good as long as we pay the past due fees. The main thing I'm trying to figure out now with our own lawyer is if they can even do that. I've read through our contract and there was no secondary HOA when we purchased our home. It did not come into existence until 9 years ago, so how are they claiming that we owe them money when, again, we did not even know they existed? Either way though, it's been fixed and it's being handled by our own attorney from there in Washington state. As for the foreclosure, that's another story. I got a hold of the county foreclosure department and they told me that there are people who searched the site for lis pendants as possible foreclosure sales, so basically a creeper who was trying to scare my parents out of the house. Real jerks. Again, thank you all for all the input and stories you all offered. This was stressful and it's still not over, but at least now I know what's happening. And the next one is the last update to the story that goes like this. So it's been 3 months since my last update and I wanted to share how everything played out with our house situation. A lot has happened and I finally have some closure to this whole mess. After discovering the existence of this sub-HOA we never knew about, as mentioned before, our attorney in Washington got right to work. She requested all documentation related to the formation of this secondary HOA, when it was established and how homeowners were notified. Well, it turns out this sub-HOA was created when the developer built the second phase of our neighborhood, but they failed to properly notify existing homeowners like us. Our attorney found out that according to Washington state law, we could not be held responsible for dues to an organization we never even properly were informed about. The sub-HOA's claim that we owed them 9 years of back dues was completely unreasonable, especially since they admitted the previous management company had been misappropriating funds. When I flew back to Seattle in June, I attended a community meeting where I discovered we were not the only ones dealing with this issue. About 15 original homeowners were in the same situation, so we decided to band together and file a joint complaint against both the sub-HOA and the developer. During the discovery process, our attorney found emails proving the developer knew they needed to notify all original homeowners about the creation of the sub-HOA, but they decided not to because they worried it would complicate things. The management company that was hired had also been charging us all along, but pocketing the money instead of recording our payments. The judge ruled in our favor, stating that the sub-HOA could only legally collect dues from the date they properly notified us, which was when they sent those letters last year. Obviously not retroactively for 9 years. The court also ordered the previous management company to pay restitution to the sub-HOA for the misappropriated funds. By the way, if someone shows up at your door claiming that your house is being foreclosed, verify everything through official channels before panicking. Those predatory investors count on your fear to make a quick buck. And yeah guys, let me know in the comments if you would ever join an HOA if you found out that your dream home would come with one. I guess in some states in the US you cannot really choose. Also, if you have watched until here, please don't forget to like the video, because that would help me tremendously since YouTube is giving me a really hard time at the moment. The next one is titled, I risked my life savings on an abandoned ranch. HOA neighbor raided my property. For a long time, I was toying around with the idea of buying an abandoned ranch for cheap, fixing it up, and then enjoying a nice, quiet life out in the countryside. It took quite a few years to make it happen, but I eventually found my dream spot in South America. I don't want to get too much more specific than that for privacy reasons, but suffice it to say, I was very happy with the location, the weather, and the neighbors. Or at least I was very happy with some of my neighbors. There were a few that turned out to be a royal pain and way more trouble than they were worth. So my new ranching life started off on a pretty good foot. There were around a dozen other properties in the area, and most of them were very friendly when I went over to visit and introduce myself. However, 3 in particular were on the cool side when I first met with them, and that turned into outright rudeness once I saw them a few more times. At first I thought they just did not really care for company or that I kept catching them in bad moods, but then things started to escalate. After a few months of living there and getting everything in order, I had started to fall into a daily rhythm. It was difficult work to bring the ranch up to scratch, but I was really enjoying it, and as such I was also constantly vigilant for anything that might go wrong. Well, that led to me being a lot more observant than I otherwise would have been, and as a consequence I ended up noticing those 3 neighbors on my property a few times. The first time I noticed it, I did not want to call them out because it did not seem like a big deal to me. Besides, I did not really know much about ranching etiquette, so maybe it was considered perfectly normal to just wander all over other people's property and use it for shortcuts or something. But after a few weeks I noticed that none of my other neighbors were brazenly using my land as they wished. It was really just the 3 that had been rude to me at the beginning. Anyway, after a couple of weeks of that, there was a knock on my front door. One of the 3 had swung by and barely let me say hello before shoving a pamphlet in my face. By the time I had looked down at it and read the title, he had already turned around and walked away. Like I said, these guys were remarkably rude. As for the pamphlet, it was advertising the local HOA. Or perhaps advertising was not the right word. Maybe it was more accurate to say that it was aggressively encouraging the reader to join the HOA, or else there would be a variety of consequences, such as not being protected from lawsuits or fines. It kind of sounded more like extortion straight out of a mafia movie than a regular HOA, but what do I know? Looking back, maybe it was not the best idea to completely ignore that visit, but I was getting a little annoyed at my neighbor, so I just decided to toss the pamphlet out before really reading it. I did glance through it though, and I did not see anything about being required by law to join the HOA, but I did not retain much more than that. And I certainly didn't expect my earlier prediction about mafia tactics to turn out so startlingly accurate. That is right, just a week after I got that visit, I started to notice strange things happening around the ranch. It started with small stuff like gates being left open when I was sure I had closed them, but it quickly turned into fences being broken that I thought I had already fixed. Once I figured out that I was not going crazy, I got furious. There were a few things quite as frustrating as having all your hard work be undone by someone with a petty grudge, I've discovered. There was also some general harassment, usually in the form of getting a phone call where the other line was silent, or someone ringing my doorbell in the middle of the night and then nobody being there when I went to check. It felt downright childish, but I wouldn't say that I really feared for my life at that point. That was partially because I did consult a few of the more friendly neighbors, and they all told me that these particular jerks were always like this with new arrivals and nobody had been hurt so far. Well, however, after I found one of my truck tires slashed, I was just done letting them get away with it. They clearly wanted me to join the HOA and probably more importantly to pay my dues, so I decided to call a lawyer and see just what could be done about the situation. The first meeting was pretty promising, but I didn't have much in the way of hard evidence, so my lawyer recommended that I start to document everything before the proceedings. From that point on, I started to record absolutely all of my improvements to the land with careful photographic documentation, just so I could have a point of comparison when anything got damaged in the future. And sure enough, completely unaware that I would be talking to a lawyer, my neighbors from hell started to ramp up their campaign of harassment. They were not interested in just a little bit of superficial damage to my fences anymore. They started smashing entire sections. If I'd had livestock on the premises, they probably would have lured them out or perhaps even forced them if they'd refused to go. And I'm not just guessing about that, by the way. It came up when chatting with the friendlier bunch of the neighbors. They mentioned that a bunch of mysterious things like that had happened a few years back when someone else bought a ranch and moved in but refused to join this HOA. Apparently they left quickly after the harassment began, so it never got seriously investigated, but I was made of sterner stuff and I was not willing to back down just because my neighbors were stepping up their efforts. If anything, it just gave me a sense of satisfaction as I recorded each and every bit of torment they tried to inflict on me. For a couple weeks I only managed to find evidence after the fact, so there was no direct link incriminating my neighbors. I tried to set up some cameras, but the ranch was simply so big that it was impossible to monitor all of it. I was also a little wary about patrolling it myself because I didn't want to find out how dangerous my neighbors might be if they were literally caught in the act and I had nobody backing me up. However, there is one place that I did manage to cover in security cameras, which was the house itself. I made sure that if they did come and try to threaten my actual house, then I would be ready for them. They did ring the doorbell and knock on the front door several times, but they wore hoodies and covered their faces, so the cameras were not all that useful. If nothing else, they did confirm that I was dealing with people rather than wild animals that were getting a little too curious, but I'd already known that. However, after 2 weeks, they slipped up. All three of the neighbors in question got together during the day when I was out on a trip into town and they decided to pay my house a visit. At night, the cameras did not catch their identities, but during the day it was a different story. When they finally got bold enough and tried to force their way through the lock on the front door, one of them put his face so close to a hidden camera that you could make out the color of his eyes and a mole on his cheek. I thought my luck could not get any better, but then one of the others tried to force one of my windows open. Unfortunately, his hood got caught on a nearby branch, and when he tried to tug it free, the cloth he was using for a mask got lost in the scuffle. Just like that, two of my harassers had revealed themselves right in front of several cameras, and they still had no idea what was coming after their little raid on my property. Emboldened by my wealth of evidence, I figured it was a good idea to get as many witnesses on my side as I could, so I went out and consulted 6 or so other neighbors just to see if they would testify on my behalf if things ever escalated to that point. To my surprise, not only were they happy to help out, but they got me in touch with some family members and ex-residents of the area, all of whom would be more than happy to finally put these jerks in their place. Before, I'd had some idea that they had a bad reputation, but only now did I learn that these families had been causing problems for generations, and the current batch was barely any better than their fathers and mothers. It seems that harassing neighbors and trying to force them to bow to petty whims was something of a family tradition in this small pond. While many people were technically in the HOA, few attended the meetings and they mostly just paid their dues to avoid dealing with this nonsense that I was going through. With this whole arsenal of legal weapons at my disposal, I went back to my lawyer to see what my options were. I had been expecting that maybe I could get some sort of restraining order to keep them off my property and away from me, but my lawyer brought up the possibility that we could also get this HOA disbanded permanently. I suppose I should not be surprised that there was more shady stuff going on beyond them trying to intimidate me into joining the HOA, but I was still rather surprised when my lawyer described just what sorts of damages and legal ramifications there could be for their misbehavior. Apparently, if things were bad enough, then they could even stand to lose their properties, and to keep a long story short, they did not get outright evicted or something, but that's just about the only good news that my 3 offending neighbors got. They were forced to completely disband the HOA, then they were also hit with a series of pretty hefty fines. It seems they'd been abusing some other property rights and redirecting some water to ensure that their land got maximum irrigation, and that came with serious penalties too. Last I heard, one of my neighbors had basically become a recluse because his reputation was so bad, while the other 2 outright fled and left their houses more or less empty. And you know what's the cherry on top? After the water got redirected back to its original course, my property benefited immensely. I think I'll be able to raise at least twice as much livestock as I originally envisioned. As best as I can tell, my neighbors from hell actually knew this, and they suspected that I might eventually find out about the water theft. The HOA agreement claimed that members could not file suits against one another for property disputes, so I think they wanted me to join so I would not be able to fight for my rights. Of course, the entire agreement was clearly unenforceable, according to my lawyer, so I guess they were just hoping to intimidate everyone into meekly obeying them. Judging by how long they managed to pull that off, I cannot say that their plan was completely brainless. You may also be pleased to hear that no new HOA was found to replace the old one. Instead, we all just try to get along as best as we can, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of it so far. And of course, for the last story, we are gonna read a story from r/petty revenge to end the video. It is titled, "Mother-in-law kept guilt-tripping me for not eating her Indian cooking, so I started bringing my own dishes and giving her the same treatment. Now she is suddenly not hungry too." So my Indian mother-in-law thinks that she's the best cook in the world and that everyone, including her son and daughter-in-law, should beg for her cooking. Well, culturally, I'm not used to a lot of Indian food because of the spices, but I will try to eat the ones I can enjoy. A lot of times I will politely tell her that I'm not hungry, or I will munch on some, but sometimes that is not a good enough response. And she will start guilt-tripping me with, "So you don't like my cooking?" Or, "Everyone loves my food, why don't you?" My significant other usually will jump in to stop her, but it always puts me in a weird spot. Since on day 1 of meeting me, she told me point blank that she does not like Chinese food. I'm Chinese, and it kinda threw me off because there were so many varieties of Chinese food, and for her to just say she hates the entire category seems odd to me. So I recently started bringing food I made whenever visiting her and telling her how excited I am to cook for her and that I hope she likes my cooking. She usually brushes it off saying she's not hungry or that she will eat it later, so I turned the tables on her, looking sad and asking her why she doesn't like my cooking. It is very entertaining to watch her try to make excuses she knows are BS. She has not asked me to eat her stuff since, so I guess this petty revenge is working. And yeah guys, if they have any leftovers, I would not mind any Chinese or Indian food, but then again I usually prefer Indian food. Thanks for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.